While the world's eyes are on the G20 summit in India's capital, New Delhi, Russian President Vladimir Putin is making headlines elsewhere. He has decided to skip the summit and is cozying up to North Korea. Putin has congratulated North Korea on its 75th founding day. There's more. The Russian leader has called for closer ties with Pyongyang on all fronts. To discuss this and a lot more, joining me now is Glenn Diesen, the Professor of International Relations at the University of Southeastern in Norway. He joins me from Oslo. Welcome to the broadcast, Professor.
Thank you for having me on.
My first question, what do you make of this statement from Putin, closer ties with Pyongyang on all fronts?
Well, I think it's definitely economic, but also military cooperation as well. I think so far it seems that North Koreans, they likely can supply artillery shells, anti-tank missiles, and a lot of other weapons as a very militarized country with production of its own. And the Russians, they have food to offer, but also weapons technology. There's already suspicions that Russia transferred international continental ballistic missiles. It's not confirmed, or at least the technology transfer for the development of more effective intercontinental ballistic missiles, those who are also capable of penetrating U.S. missile defense. But it's not just in the weapons sphere. They're seeking much wider cooperation, economic
right.
then.
Now, Kim Jong-Un is poised for an arms deal with Russia. There are reports of North Korea selling ammunition to Moscow for the war in Ukraine. How will this change the course of the war?
Well, it probably won't change it to a great extent. The Russians have a huge production of their own. However, they also source material from other places, drones, for example. But of course, the Russians wouldn't want to run short on ammunition. So I'm sure they would take any ammunition from North Korea, which they can, in order to make sure that their stockpiles are refilled. So I assume that this will be part of the agreements which will be coming forward.
Right. Now, analysts also say that Kim is pursuing an ideology that promotes the development of the economy and of nuclear weapons. That's a dangerous cocktail. And Russia as a nuclear power, how will this new alliance affect the war?
Well, the thing is, neither Russia or China, for that sake, is too happy about the nuclear weapons program of North Korea. However, a key problem for Russia is that the Americans have no incentives to negotiate, only to escalate in Ukraine, because the US is fighting the Russians through a proxy, which is they're fighting with Ukrainians. As top American officials keep reminding us, which is like Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, Mitt Romney, Dan Crenshaw, General Keith Kellogg, they always say the same thing. They say this is a great war. We can kill Russians, weaken its military, and undermine the Russian Federation without losing any American soldiers. So this is, a good firing position, which is why Hillary Clinton also said, we can make Ukraine into an Afghanistan for the Russians. So if this is your position, why would you negotiate? And the answer then becomes, what would you think if you're in Moscow? Well, they would seek a different form of escalation to bring pain to the US. And this is called a horizontal escalation, in which you then increase the pain on the US on another front. Thus, showing that you can also undermine America's security if they undermine the Russian. So this is
right.
This is part of the pressure they're putting on the US, so they would put an end to the war.
Right. Now, we know all the global leaders have assembled for the G20 summit here in India and New Delhi. What does Putin have to gain from associating with North Korea? He has skipped the summit. North Korea is an isolated country with few allies. Is Russia also fearing isolation at this point?
Well, Russia's isolated among the NATO countries, but in the rest of the world, it doesn't face the same problems. But the relationship between Russia and North Korea is quite interesting, because in the 90s, when Russia wanted to be close to the West, they actually neglected North Korea. But what they found out then is they lost their influence in East Asia. So they were cut out from all the diplomacy between the North and South Koreans. Only when they began to restore the relations with North Korea were they then invited back into the diplomatic groups. And we see the same now. They want good relations with both North Korea and South Korea. This is part of what the Eurasian integration issue. So if they want to connect to South Korea, they have to go through North Korea as well. So it's not an alliance system or a zero-sum game necessarily, because they're not allying with the North Koreans against the South Koreans. Instead, this is seen as a way to bring Russia closer to both of them, which is why they have all these initiatives from gas pipelines, railroads, industrial development. So I wouldn't see it as an alliance, though.
Just a final question there, Professor. Let's talk about three countries. Now, at the founding day, Kim also said that he wants to deepen the ties with Russia and China. So when we talk about China, Russia and North Korea, is that an alliance in the making? And should the West be worried?
Well, worried, of course. These are all adversaries now of the West. We have declared that the Russians are an enemy. We consider the Chinese a threat, and obviously North Korea as well. But I don't see any alliances. Alliances often suggest the country A and B would cooperate against country C. But as we see, a lot of this cooperation in Eurasia, it requires harmonizing relations with neighbors, which is why you see, for example, BRICS or the SCO. They bring together countries like China and India and Pakistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia. So this is a way of connecting this Eurasian continent. And I wouldn't see it directly as an alliance. Of course, in the military sphere, the North Koreans, the Chinese, and the Russians all have in common that the Americans and NATO has defined them as a threat. Thus, of course, they will find areas then to work against a common adversary of their own.
Absolutely, Professor Glenn. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for all your insights.